Today, we're going to talk about the 7 stages teachers go through as they transition out of the classroom into a new career path. I'm Carrie Conover, the founder and creator of Classroom to Boardroom, and I have a little gift for you today. If you're a visual person who likes to follow along or have some type of visual representation of your learning, I've created a beautiful PDF with these 7 stages just for you. Obviously, I'll include the link so you can find that easily, and you can get that printout to follow along and take notes, or like I said, just keep on your desktop computer or in your files. It is 2023, and I've been at this teacher transition coaching and coursework for over 2 years now. I actually came up with the idea for this course 5 years ago, but for the last 2 years, I have been helping teachers, principals, administrators identify their skill set and find a new job outside of the classroom. With all of this coaching and working with teachers who have actually made it into these new career fields, I've learned a thing or two about the different stages that teachers and educators go through when they go through this transition process. It actually starts earlier than you might think, and it's not a linear experience. So people will kind of go through different stages, go back to a stage. They are sometimes in different order. So when I'm going through these 7 stages, keep that in mind that, I'm not saying that this is a linear process. You could be all over the place. It's kind of like the stages of grief. That's not a linear process either. Unfortunately, I've had to go through that process myself several times. And what you learn about grief is that you can be in one stage, you can back up, you can jump ahead. And that's the same thing with the teacher transition process. Gosh, I really shouldn't talk about it like it's grief, but in some ways, what educators go through when they finally make the decision to leave the classroom is sort of a loss and does sometimes feel like grief. Okay, let's get started in these 7 stages. So the first stage that I see teachers go through when they're thinking about leaving the classroom is contemplation. This can start years before teachers, educators ever take any action. So contemplation is recognizing unhappiness. And that doesn't mean necessarily that you hate the profession or that you're totally burnt out or that you're miserable. It can mean those things. It can mean I don't want to do this anymore, but it also can just be that feeling of like, hey, maybe I picked the wrong profession for myself. Maybe I'm feeling a little bored. It can look like I want to move up. I want to do bigger things and have bigger impact, but the only choice I have is to be a coach or a principal, and that's not really what I want to do. It can also look like I don't really enjoy working with students anymore. Students have changed. The teaching profession's different. It can look like all of these things, but in contemplation, it's where you're starting to recognize this unhappy feeling and you're wondering if there are other options for you and you're dreaming of change, but you don't really know what that change is going to look like. In the second stage, I call this decision making. And in the decision-making stage, you're realizing, okay, I cannot be in this role any longer. I'm done. It is time to start making a change. I need to find options. So in the first stage, you're kind of thinking of it and dreaming of it. In the second stage, it's like, no, it's time for me to make a change. The next stage is what I like to call the exploration stage. And this is when you begin to go looking for options. So you start maybe learning about new career paths. You start joining LinkedIn and maybe start a little bit of networking. You start talking to friends about what you could do outside of the classroom. You might even start researching coaches such as myself or other coaches that are out there and programs you can join. This is that exploration point where I think you're opening up your mind to possibilities. And then what usually happens is fear sets in. A lot of times, teachers and educators realize this process is harder than I thought it was going to be. You might run into some people who kind of stereotype teachers and their skill sets that don't really know exactly what a teacher can do and all the skills they have that transition really well into a role outside of the classroom. But you also sometimes start to let guilt set in about leaving and self-doubt creep in. And again, this can happen before exploration, it can happen later, but this is definitely a stage that I see many people go through is like, is this ever going to happen for me? And oftentimes that's when teachers in transition and educators in transition end up with me. And this stage, number 5, I call the action stage. And that's where you realize, like, if I'm going to make this happen, I'm going to have to take this next phase of my life seriously and invest in myself. So often this is when I see people kind of pull the trigger and join classroom to boardroom and really get an education, really learn about the jobs, get trained up and upskill so that they are a candidate that education companies want to talk to. So in stage 5, that's the action stage where it's like, okay, I can do this. I need to upskill. I'm going to start actually applying for roles that I could get. And that's something we're going to talk about later is like, are you applying for the correct roles? So after that action stage in stage 5, I often see people shift, especially after they join my program Classroom to Boardroom, into a belief stage. Their confidence is up. They know they can do various roles outside of the classroom. So I call this the belief stage, the 6th stage. This is where you understand the various roles. You have identified the roles that would be best for you instead of applying for everything that's out there. You start believing in your talents and you're able to speak to them and articulate your talents and say, hey, I am the ideal candidate for this role. And when you're applying, your resume is now in really good shape. And when you're applying, you're actually getting interviews. And when you're interviewing, you are confident and you believe in yourself. That is the 6th stage, belief. And finally, stage 7 is the result stage where you land your first role outside of a school setting. I have seen this over and over again. And this year in 2023, I'm going to be sharing out a lot of success stories for my students who have made this transition, who have gone through all of these phases. As a matter of fact, next week, I'm going to share out the story of one of my first students, Olivia, who now works for Scholastic. And we're going to talk about these stages that she went through and really focus in on her contemplation stage when she really had that awakening that even though she was happy as a teacher, she needed more. So I hope you join me next week for my interview with Olivia. And I hope you've enjoyed learning about these 7 stages. I hope it makes you feel less alone and help you realize that other people are going through things that you go through. So just to wrap this up, the 7 stages are contemplation, decision-making, exploration, fear, action, belief, and results.